Good late morning, friends. Early afternoon, perhaps. Today is Thanksgiving Day, and I want to offer a reflection time for all of us. A sort of a Thanksgiving worship time, if you will. We haven't had one of those services at Shepherd of the Hills for about 2 or 3 years now, but every year there is an assigned text for the day. This year, the text, the gospel at least, is from the Gospel of St. Luke, the 17th chapter. It's a familiar story. Let me read it for you. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." I have just one thought for the moment, or 2 thoughts for the moment. Number one, he got a 10% return on his forgiveness moments. Wow, his cleansing moments gave 1 out of 10 the opportunity to come back and say thank you. I guess if 1 out of 10 of us say thank you today, God would be happy. But let's make sure that's more than double. Let's make sure that's 900 times more. 9 out of 10 of us saying thank you. I think the other thing that strikes me about that parable is that Jesus uses this once more to talk about the outsider, the Samaritan, the foreigner. That's the one that came back to say thank you. Maybe there's a message there in that parable as we peel apart the onion layers and delve deeper into it without crying too much about what Jesus is saying. Maybe he's recognizing that it's not always the ones who are in the midst of us who recognize the need for saying thanks. But we do have that need. The other thing that I want to offer is that quite a few years ago, I'm sure it was more than 20 years ago, that somebody gave me a book that is a series of reflections and stories about the Gospels. It's written by an Episcopal priest by the name of Martin Bell. It's called The Way of the Wolf. Martin wrote another book at least. I don't remember the title of it, but it's more of the same things. Here's his reflection on the story of the 10 lepers. It's called Where Are the 9? How would a word or two on behalf of the 9 lepers who did not return to give thanks? The gospel reads something like this. There were 10 lepers cleansed, and just one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back and in a loud voice glorified God, fell down at his face at Jesus' feet, and giving him thanks. Then Jesus answering said, "Were not there 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? 10 lepers were cleansed, and one of them returned to give thanks." This must be a nice thing to be able to do. Pause there for a moment. I like that concept. It must be a nice thing to be able to do, to give thanks. I'd like to think that we're just ingrained in that. But listen to where Bell takes me and you now in hearing about the other 9. What about the others? It's simple, really. One of them was frightened. That's all. He didn't understand what had happened, and it frightened him. He didn't understand what had happened, and it frightened him. So he looked for some place to hide. Jesus scared him. A second was offended because he had not been required to do something difficult before he had been healed. It was all too easy. He had expected months, maybe years of fasting and prayer and washing and religious living to be the requirement. But he had done none of this. He had not earned his reward. His motto was, "You get what you pay for." And Jesus offended him. The third had realized too late that he had not really wanted to be cleansed. Then he did not know what to do or how to live or even who he was without his leprosy. Although it had been his fervent plea to be healed, he now began to see how much he had needed his leprosy, and consequently how necessary it had been in defining him as a person. Jesus had taken away his identity. It is difficult to explain the reason why the fourth leper did not return to give thanks, perhaps because it is such a simple reason, and perhaps because it very nearly treaded on holy ground even to talk about it. In a word, the fourth leper did not return because in his delirium of joy, he forgot. He forgot. That's all. He was so happy that he forgot. The fifth leper was unable to say thank you anymore to anybody. There is something that happens to a man who must beg and who is shunned by his fellows and who is grudgingly thrown a few coins and who is always, in the midst of such an existence and in the face of such treatment, perhaps even because of such treatment, for instance, the few coins, expected to say thank you. He just didn't say thank you anymore to anybody, not even to Jesus. The sixth leper was a woman, a mother who had been separated from her family for 11 years because of her leprosy. She was now free to rejoin her husband and children. She did not return to give thanks because she was hurrying home. Like a wild animal released from captivity, she had been freed by Jesus. And like the animal, she simply went straight home. The seventh just didn't believe that Jesus had anything to do with the cleansing. He knew that the healing had taken place, but why and how were the questions. Certainly he did not believe in hocus pocus, magic, miracles, any of that. There was a perfectly intelligible explanation of what had happened, but it didn't have anything to do with Jesus. He didn't return to give thanks because Jesus had nothing to do with the healing event. The eighth leper did not return precisely because he did believe that Jesus had healed him, that the kingdom of God was here and the Messiah had arrived. To return to give thanks when the kingdom of God was so close at hand, unheard of. And so he ran to publish the news. What shall I say about the ninth leper? What was his experience? Why didn't he return? I don't know the answer to either of these questions. All I know is that he showed himself to the priest and immediately was cleansed. He then stood still for a moment and smiled. The priest reports that the ninth leper gave two utterances. First he said, "So," and then, "Ah, yes." Without another word, he walked away. His eyes blazed with fire, but his shoulders sagged as if under a great burden. The air around him was silent. Then, without warning, he turned his head suddenly and fixed his eyes upon a rock by the side of the road. "Ha!" he screamed. And you can make of it what you want. But the priest says that the rock actually jumped a foot off the ground. The ninth leper then said, "So," and, "Ah, yes," and disappeared from sight. It was impossible to say precisely why he did not return to give thanks. 10 were cleansed, and only 1 returned. It must be nice to be able to do that. What shall I say now? That the real point is not that 1 returned, but that 10 were cleansed? You already knew that. That condemnation is easier than investigation. That if we take time to investigate the reasons why people act as they do, we will find that they have to act the way they do, and that such action in the light of the circumstances is quite understandable and totally forgivable, and even completely reasonable, and just as it should be? You already know that. What then shall I say? That it is good to give thanks? Yes. That it is understandable not to give thanks? Yes. That God does not heal people and then stand around just waiting for us to say thank you and then get angry and have God's feelings hurt if we don't? Yes, that's true, which is the same thing as saying, no, God certainly doesn't. But what of the 9? They were on their way home, hiding in fear, refusing to believe, offended at what they called cheap grace, so happy they forgot, lost without their leprosy, unable to say thank you ever again, publishing the news of the coming of the kingdom. God, who knows where they are? The point is this: Jesus does. He knows where they are. First, he says to the leper who did return, "Arise, go thy way." Then he goes his own way with a strange smile on his lips. But where are the 9? Do you see it in his eyes? He knows where they are. He knew it all along. Without another word, Jesus walks away. His eyes blaze fire, but his shoulders sag as if under a great burden. The air around him is silent. Then, without warning, he turns his head suddenly and fixes his eyes upon a rock by the side of the road. Ha! He screams, and you can make of it what you want, but they say the rock actually jumped a foot off the ground. Jesus then said, "So," and "Ah, yes," and disappeared from sight. It's impossible to say precisely why Jesus did not return to give thanks. As you gather and give thanks, as you sit around your table, as one person once told me, groaning under the weight of all the food, but perhaps this year it's not groaning so much because the numbers at the table are smaller. Let's give thanks. Why? Because it's great to be able to do that. Let's give thanks even in the midst of our joy that we're safe together, even in the midst of racing home, even in the midst of saying the kingdom is near, the end is coming. We hope the end of COVID-19. But let's give thanks for all of the gifts that God has given. And who knows, maybe if you say, "Ha!" something will actually jump a foot off the ground. And then you can say, "So," and "Ah, yes." I give thanks for people like Martin Bell, who challenge me to think in new ways. Hopefully I've given you something to think about as well. Happy Thanksgiving.